Good to go?
About party.
That is incredible.
Yeah, it's
All right.
really cool.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone for our session on next generation changemakers. We have a few stats to get us warmed up and started. Then I'll request all our panelists to give a brief introduction and then get into our conversation. Can we get the presentation started? So we're discussing today's next generation changemakers on how Generation Z has evolved in the way they work and how the workplace has evolved. What we'll do today is I'll spend about 5-7 minutes, hopefully not 8, on a quick introduction. Then we have a conversation with our esteemed panelists for about 30 minutes. We'll open it up for questions for about 10 minutes and then close it immediately after. The question we are asking is the workforce of today more dynamic and mobile than ever before? In some ways a rhetorical question. But the question evolves as you look at different generations or sub-generations that are in the workforce today. Right, so there was a silent generation, baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, and where we are focused on today is Gen Z, which seems to take a very different approach to work, very different approach to workplace than what was done before. We see they're more self-aware, they're more pragmatic, and we see them a bit as wanderers, right, who own the journey and they build themselves out based on their own internal compasses more than driven by what set rules have been in the past. They are digital natives. They're very comfortable with tech. They've seen a lot of globalization and they've seen it move up and down. And they've seen crisis. So this is one generation that has seen crisis from their very early days and continue to see it over and over again and have a very different approach to crisis than what generations before have had. We see them as probably more agile, more responsive as conditions around them change. So in this era of survival, we see youth are eager for change. A few numbers, we've seen employees surveyed say 1 in 5 plan to quit or change this year, 20% of the workforce. In the US, you've seen 48 million Americans that have resigned as part of the great resignation we've heard about. When we raise this question across the world, more than 50% of workers in France, Germany, Japan are open to looking for new jobs in the coming year. That number goes up to 60% and above when we go to UK and Australia. So it is a time of significant change, right? So what is the aspiration that the new generation is trying to create for themselves? Is it driven by income? Are they just looking for more money? Is it looking for more personal well-being or more balance between work and life? Is it about finding what they are best at and trying to maximize their own potential? Or is it about job security, right? We don't know which one. You see that these are all in terms of numbers very close to each other, right? So it varies from one set to another. So the question we are trying to debate and discuss today is how will the next generation of change makers define when and maybe even why we work, right? So with that, let me welcome our esteemed panelists, and if you could take 30 seconds just to introduce yourself, starting with yourself, Mona, and then we can go around the dais.
Great. So good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Mona Ataya. I'm the founder and CEO of Mums World. Mums World is a pure play, vertical play in the region. We were the pioneers in the vertical space in 2011. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. No. Khaled?
Hello, my name is Khaled Zatra. I'm the founder and CEO of Views. It's the leading immersive video platform globally. We have started from the region, but now we're scaling globally with offices in Los Angeles and soon enough in Europe. Glad to be here with you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I've grown a global media company in the US here, and now it's a global company, grew to millions of people. And now I'm running a Web3 venture studio.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Sheikha.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Sheikha Shouesh. I'm a strategy advisor for the Vice Minister of Tourism at the Ministry of Tourism of Saudi Arabia. I work to promote our beautiful destination to the rest of the world.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for taking the time and for being here. The first question that I would like to present to all of you, and if, again, can get views from everyone, is on, as you were seeing, there's a lot of changes that there's a very different approach that Gen Z is taking to their workforce and to the way they work. And we've seen some of it has accelerated or even shifted during and post-COVID. Where do you think this is coming from? What do you think are the key changes? One, what are the key trends you're seeing in the workforce? And what do you think is driving that? So if we can spend a minute or two on that, that'll be very helpful.
Sure. So as you rightfully said earlier, this is a digital generation. They're very comfortable online. They're comfortable with tablets, smartphones, their computers, much more than any of the previous generations. So when you see a Gen Z in the office on their mobile phone, they're likely not gaming, they're likely actually working. So that's how they work. They're also, and it's something you touched on earlier, they are a generation that's driven mostly by this purpose, this sense of purpose. So they want to be associated with organizations that represent values, mission and vision that is aligned with their values. Importantly, also, the leaders of these organizations need to also be inspiring. They want to be associated with them, have the same values. So again, it's a generation that's looking for belonging. It's looking to be part of something that's bigger than them, that's important, and that essentially, although they are younger, they're looking at their legacy from now, much more so than we did at that age. So that's kind of broadly the stroke.
Thank you. Khalid?
Rightfully said, Mona mentioned great points there. And I believe the new generation is digital, but as well they're creators. They love to create. And I think there's three main parts of that. So they're creators, they want to be owners, and they want to be innovators as well. So owners, they want to feel that they own something. They own that product. They're part of that. Creators, they would like to create things that they feel that they're creating that things. And innovating, they're always looking to have something new. And I feel that they get bored quickly, much quicker than the old generation. So this is how you need to be innovative as a company as well to make sure that they don't get bored. They're empowered and they have that ownership and their creativity to be able to be empowered and to take things forward and to always be engaged with the company along the way.
Thank you. Michelle?
I think there's a bunch of things, and in addition to what both of you have said, there's a really big focus on mental health. Like, that's probably the most important one. Mental well-being and just peace in life, good vibes, energy. Like, these are what are really important. We've been working with Gen Z for a while, but we actually had Gen Z running departments as well, and they're very critical of work-life balance and what previous standards have been set, right? So they kind of have their own expectations, and they're not going to accept anything that doesn't kind of rise up to that, right? And so they're very comfortable, sort of, you wrote wanderers, but I'd say wanderers as well, where it's okay to switch from one to the next until you find it, and it's not a bad sign. So I think previously where you saw people working at places for longer is really good signs. I think when you have Gen Z running departments, they're going to look at it very differently, because they'll be like, were you okay with unfair boundaries, or were you just in places you weren't happy? And so that's a very, very big emphasis and focus that they have, and they're very comfortable with just kind of exploring and kind of being open-minded in that way.
Thank you. And Sheikha, what are your thoughts on that?
Perfect. As a Gen Zer, I can speak on behalf of my generation. So I think what drives us is actually curiosity, right? We grew up having a lot of access to information that the previous generations didn't. You go on TikTok and you're flooded with a lot of different informations, a lot of different sectors, and so on and so forth. So that fuels your curiosity. So who says that I have a chemical engineering degree, but I can't work in tourism and I can't DJ at night? So it's our curiosity trying to shift from one career into another and not setting on one specific path forever.
All right. And do you think COVID has had an impact on the way Gen Z works versus what they did before? And are there changes there that are significant? I don't know, whoever wants to take it.
So COVID has either anchored or sped what already had started before. And one example is working in a hybrid fashion. So with globalization, with internet technology, we realized maybe 8 to 10 years ago that we could actually work from home just as efficiently as we can in the office. What COVID did is it accelerated that, and it mandated that organizations create the systems and the enablers to allow that to be a reality. So in fact, I would say the 9 to 5 is a relic of the past. The Gen Z expects it. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have, because they recognize that with the right enablers that their employer provides them, they can work efficiently, productively outside. Now what we're finding employers are doing is, instead of creating mandates to come into the office from 9 to 5, what they're doing is they're creating guidelines and operating rhythms. So they're suggesting that this Gen Z can come into the office for collaboration, for brainstorming, for group meetings, for this feeling, again, to go back to what they call the new home or the second home. And insofar that you have this balance of in office and out of office, then that's what the Gen Z is inspired by, and that what promotes more productivity. Right. So that's one of the key changes of COVID. You. And sorry, one other thing with COVID that we've seen is again this major barrage of digital enablers that allow for better collaboration, that allow for remote innovation that didn't exist even 5 years ago. Zoom is just one of the examples.
Absolutely. I think you had an interesting point of view on that when we were chatting earlier.
So, I mean, it's interesting, right? COVID happened and we were remote, but I mean, I consider myself as like a child of the internet. So it's always been a very, like, making friends online, and that's just been very intuitive and just natural. And I think the younger you go, the more natural it is. It's just an extension of in real life experiences, right? And so I look at my cousin's kids who all use Discord, and they know how to automate these channels and threads because that's just normal when you're playing these games and interacting. So I mean, I think with COVID, companies have just caught up and are just starting to. But the next, like, again, anyone who is between the ages of 5 to 12 even, they will all be super native, and it's such an easier transition for some of the newer spaces as well, like Web3, where so much of it is remote and global, and they're just that way by nature because it's so easy. So it's almost like older folks have to catch up to how the world is going to be, but younger folks, they're just like, yeah, this is just how we are. This is how we interact, make friends, get job opportunities and roles, and so that's a big one. And then with remote opportunities, I think the other part is boundaries is a really, really big one. Like one of the things we were talking about right earlier, where a lot of companies say we're a family, but for a lot of Gen Z, that's actually a red flag because they're like, we're a sports team, not a family, because the expectation is there's going to be unreasonable demands and asks if it's a family, but if it's a sports team, we're all in it together, but then there's a boundary, you go home, you do whatever else you want to do, and so that's another really, really important point.
That's a very interesting point. And Shikha, what's your thought? Do you think COVID has changed expectations? Is that something that you were already seeing, or is that something that's
Yes, of course. So building on what Muna said, I think that 9 to 5 no longer exists in our dictionary anymore. I am just as efficient, if not more efficient, when I'm not in the office, right? People come in, come out, they distract you. But having that freedom to be able to manage my own schedule and manage my own time, and not even, sometimes I may be happier working on a beach in Sri Lanka than I am in a brick and mortar building, right, in the ministry office. So you need to change scenery, you need to change the way people are working. training in order to make them feel like they're productive and they're efficient and you can trust them as well. That element of trust and managing your own schedule is so important for Gen Zers, I believe.
A beach in Sri Lanka definitely sounds a lot of fun. Yes, we should do that. So my next question, I think, more for you, Khaled, and for you, Mona, because you've built successful businesses from scratch. You've hired teams, worked with them. What elements, how have you framed your companies and your operating model for your talent in a manner that actually maximizes the good changes that have happened and manage the ones that are probably not as productive? Right? That'll be good to understand.
I think one of the most important things is what I mentioned is the ownership.
Okay.
So from day one, we had an ESOP shares pool for all the employees. And now almost all of my employees, all of the employees have ESOP shares. So they feel they are owners and they're partners in the company. So that's what matters. Because at the end of the day, if you feel that this is something that you own, you'll be dedicated to it. And what we have done is we built a lot of transparency with dashboards for all the employees to check their shares, their future shares amount, what are the milestones for the company, and they have like a dashboard that they can move, and they see what the valuation would be for their shares and the equity and the benefits and everything. And we did this fully transparent for everyone, which really built that ownership that now I know that they are more dedicated even if they work in Sri Lanka or if they work from home. I know that I always tell them, it's a golden opportunity in your hands, right? You're part of something that is great, that's scaling, and you have shares in this, and you have partners and people that are investing in this. So imagine you're starting your company, but without actually putting your own money, but we have the capital, the people, the team to build this big. So I think ownership is a very, very big part to really put everyone together.
Also very, very powerful incentive, right?
It is.
And the need for 9 to 5 to monitor people is taken away if you create that incentive of ownership. This is a very good point.
So I would say there are probably 3 things that we focused on in the last, particularly 5 years, but more focused in the last 5 years. The first is training and development. So this is fundamental to this new generation. And why is that? Because we are today no longer hiring for jobs. We're actually hiring for skills. So we are in a constant stage of upskilling and reskilling our staff to essentially allow us to cross-fertilize across the organization. So someone, for example, who has social media skills, for instance, doesn't necessarily need to be a social media manager. They can be a social media manager, they can be upskilled to be a content developer, they could be reskilled to be in the healthcare business. And so the advantage for organizations is you're really focusing on skills in this fast-moving, dynamic world that you can cross-fertilize. Now, for this new generation, and you said it earlier, who are bored very quickly, who want challenge, who want creativity and autonomy, if you're constantly moving them around the organization and they're adding value, that's also a way to retain them. So that's one way. The second thing that's very important for us, and you talked about it earlier, and that's this notion of employee wellness. Now, in my generation, when you talk about mental health or wellness, people would laugh at you. Today, if you don't talk about it, people would laugh at you. And the reality is what employers are recognizing now is that you have to look at an employee as a total being, recognizing that what affects one part of their life essentially impacts all of their life. So if they are unhappy in their job, they're going to be unhappy at their home, with their children, etc. So employers that are able to create that 360 and show this new generation that they're delivering on that, that's the powerful employer. And examples are wellness programs, health programs, flexi pay, flexi hours. I mean, the list is endless. So we have deliberately mandated in our organization that we've shifted the DNA to accommodate for that. Last but certainly not least is this notion of collaboration and input. So this is a generation that wants to be heard. Again, my generation, you sit me behind a computer for 10 hours a day, I am super happy. This new generation, they don't want to do that. They want to collaborate, they want to voice their opinions, they want to be heard. And so organizations, even the way they are set up and structured, are structured for collaborations. You have the pockets of rooms that allow for collaboration. You have the technology enablers that allow for better collaboration, etc. So these are the 3 priorities for us.
It's very interesting and how it links very well to, I think, Shika, what you were raising in terms of the variety that people are looking for, the mental health question, Mashal, that you raised. So it's good to see those come together. Shika, one question for you. From the perspective of Gen Z, how much does Gen Z expect this, or how much do they notice the effort companies are making to adjust to the new way of working?
So I was lucky enough to be given opportunities in organizations that gave me a voice, right? So I came into tourism about a year ago, and I'm already a decision maker. I have been given a title of a Secretary General leading the upcoming World Travel and Tourism Council happening next month, actually here, so you're all invited. But I think, we definitely notice it, because if they do give you that space and that empowerment, and you do have that voice, you will be able to create. And as you said, jobs are no longer jobs, right? They're a lifestyle. You commit to the lifestyle. So whatever you're committed to doing, it impacts all the other areas of your life. So if your employer is giving you flexibility, if your employer is trusting you, if your employer is listening to you and engaging you as part of that decision-making process, it makes or breaks your tenure in that job, I believe.
Okay, that's good. And then, Mashal, for you, because you have the opportunity to work with and scale not 1, not 2, but many companies in the region and internationally. So you've probably seen many of these different approaches being taken to how talent is managed by fast-scaling companies. What have you seen that you think has worked well, and what have you seen that you think doesn't work so well?
It's interesting because in a lot of traditional companies, you'll have mentors and career coaches. With Gen Z and just people using TikTok, you have career coaching happening on your social media. Like, you have so many tips, and a lot of them that I go through, and I'm like, damn, I wish I knew that when I started, right? And so you have a very, intelligent generation of young people, and I say young, but I feel like I'm young too, but you have people that are very aware, that are not afraid to ask tough questions, and that know what they want. And so I think there's a shift. I think in North American countries, and especially the US, Canada, certain places in Europe as well, I think startups and startup founders have been quicker to adapt. They understand that because they want the best talent, right? So they're making those mental, sort of mindset shifts. But in the region, I'm seeing a bit of a shift because I feel like a lot of structures are being challenged. It's a different way of doing things. And so depending on what the background of the founders are, some are taking time to understand, right? Because we still have a lot of millennials who are looking for roles and things like that. So they still want that sort of status quo, and they want that sort of this is what needs to be done, so it just needs to happen regardless of the environment. But then you have certain founders who are very forward-thinking now. And so there's a shift, but I'd say it's been a challenge with a lot of the founders I've worked with. And helping build programs and playbooks and cycles where it's not just about the talent. The talent will leave likely, right? So you need systems in place where the system stays and it's easy to plug and play people. And exactly what Mona said, skills, right? When someone can learn and adapt quicker, you're looking for that sort of fit in the culture, and they can learn and they can quickly be plugged into whatever is happening. So that's what I've been trying to implement as well with founders. But yeah, it's definitely been a challenge, I think, regionally. Because it's not what people are used to.
And are there particular techniques that you've seen? So we heard a few, right? So we heard the one on ownership that seems to work very well. We heard the one on training and collaboration. So we've heard a few. Are there others that you've seen in your work with a lot of different firms?
Fellowship programs work really well, right? And so even getting high schoolers who are some of the best schools and some of the most talented young folks, we're seeing them organize events. We're seeing them really understand content creation in a lot of these key areas. And so I'd say they're really great. And having fellowship programs is a great way to have that recurring talent creation almost. Even if you're a small startup, that's the thing. If you can build it well, it takes a little bit of time initially to implement. Once you've got that in place, you can literally keep it running. And it's like a cycle almost. So that's one that I've seen work really well. And then the second would be working with colleges who've got co-op programs. So it's a mandatory number of weeks that you need to do to graduate. And so that's one that a lot of companies are also partnering with and just kind of finding easier access to talent with.
And that, I think, is a good way for the company as well as the students to test each other whether it works or it doesn't. This is very interesting. One question I have was so there are things that companies are doing, there are things that Gen Z is doing themselves, right? But then there are facilitators, there's government, there's industry bodies, so that there's other players, stakeholders in the mix. Is there things that they should be doing or things that they should be seeing that they're not seeing today that they should start to focus on as well?
Is the question about the policymakers or the Gen Z?
Policymakers, yes.
I think the drivers today are, less the policymakers and more the entrepreneurs and the Gen Z who are essentially driving ideas that get the attention of the policymakers who then react to these ideas. So that's the reality. I mean, the policymakers are not going to initiate these enablers. These come from these businesses that are creating this legacy effect of success. I will say one thing, though, that's very important across the board, and that is today innovation cycles are faster than they've ever been. Organizations are becoming very heavily dependent on knowledge. So information today is your greatest asset. That's the reality. So access to information within the organization or outside the organization, removing any kind of blockage there is imperative. And so that's one thing that we've seen in the last few years, if you like, internally and within the policy framework has shifted dramatically.
How about yourself? You're in one of these businesses where you're starting to push the boundaries. Where do you see that? Is that something that matters in your talent proposition?
Definitely, and this is where what's important is for the employees to take risks, to be empowered, to try new things and be creative and all of that. And I always try to empower that. It's not easy to really empower that and let them to come up with new ideas and take risks. But something that I started doing the past couple of months, which I feel is giving them that risk mindset, is I have been writing down challenges and risks that I took and some winning stories since the past 4 years. And I had numbered them from 1 to 100 now. And every week during our weekly call, I ask them to choose a number during our team weekly number. So I tell them the challenge. I tell them the risk. I tell them what was the success story about it. So they feel, Khalid have gone through that risk and he took that risk and he made that. So they get inspired to try to do something new and take that extra step and be creative and find new ways and so forth. So there's always tools and ways to try to really empower them and give them that freedom to really do some great changes.
Right. And going back to the question of policymakers, do you think policymakers have a role to play here or not so much?
100%.
Think so?
And we're seeing some of the best examples in the UAE, where the quickest shifts to crypto regulation, a lot of focus on the metaverse, even though some may say it's a buzzword, but younger kids have already been on Roblox and all these different tools and avenues, and they already are so familiar with it. And I love that in this region, we're seeing some of the quickest innovations happening from a policy perspective as well. I would say the US is actually very unfriendly when it comes to a lot of the innovation happening, and a lot of other governments and policymakers don't understand. What I love is in this region, we have young policymakers who understand and who are super switched on, and they want to understand. They want to be the first ones to jump to it and attract the best talent and the best group of people. And they want to have that even for local talent. And I think that's something that I really appreciate, because being in a space that's so fast-paced, you need people who understand that and who understand the switches that are happening quickly.
I'd like to just add to that as well, because I think it's important to note, certainly, and I agree with you, that this region is unique in that it has been incredibly progressive in adapting to change incredibly fast. We've seen it in Saudi, we've seen it in the UAE, where they're seeing the change, they're creating the regulations and the policies very quickly to not only adapt to the change, but to be front and center. By talking to the entrepreneurs, by talking to the ecosystem, by asking what the enablers are that are missing or that need to be optimized. And we've lived through this. I've been an entrepreneur in the UAE now. I've had 2 businesses launched. I've exited 2 businesses. And the dramatic change that has happened in my tenure as an entrepreneur has been staggering, unlike anywhere else in the world, for sure.
You probably, Shika, get to do a little bit of this policy making yourself in your role.
Yes, it's really interesting, and I wanted to add on to what my fellow panelists said. It's very important to have youth within the policymakers table. They need to have a seat there, right? And to be completely honest with you, I hate the word youth, because that's just, that to a certain extent, it kind of shows that, oh, you're immature, but we'll hear you out. No, you need to hear me out, because innovative solutions require innovative policies. So you need to hear the youth or the younger generation out and co-create with them the policies for the future. So one is empower them, listen to them, and co-create with them.
Right, it's good to hear. I want to open up also for questions from the audience, but before that, it'll be good if everybody could take a minute to, if there's one takeaway that you think people should take away from this conversation, what do you think it would be? One of you could start.
So I would say that if I were sitting in front of a friend 15 years ago, and I told my friend that I was sitting in an Uber on my iPhone 6, WhatsApping my assistant to send me a Zoom link so that I can have a meeting, but before she does that, she needs to send me my documents in a Dropbox. The friend would think I'm talking gibberish, because none of that existed 15 years ago. But all of that is our way of work today. It's what we do every day. It's what we do multiple times a day. So the rate of change has been staggering. So the reality is this new generation and the older generation needs to recognize that we are no longer walking. We are running at 1,000 miles an hour. And the normal of today is going to be obsolete tomorrow. And that ability to be flexible, agile, and open to that change is the only way to succeed, and it's the only way to progress.
Thank you. Khalid, your point of view?
Actually, I think the most important word is balance, and being flexible and seeing what's happening in the future. Being innovative and being open-minded as well with the changes. Because if you ask me maybe 4 years ago and tell me 80% of your employees will work from home, I will go crazy. I'll tell you, no, how come? We can't do that, right? How they work. But when you get to do it and you see how you manage things and get things moving, and you find the right balance, then you see, okay, this is how flexible you need to be. But unfortunately, many companies are still with the old mindset that they hold a stick and they go behind you to get things moving. And no, you came late, 5 minutes late, 5 minutes. So being innovative is the way to succeed, and being flexible and understanding the new generation, because now you have new generations that will come up, right? So what will be the next generation? And that's a very important question to keep our mindsets open for.
Thank you.
Mine would be embrace the change. A lot of these boundaries and conversations and shifts in mindsets are actually really great for each one of us. So embrace the change and make your own systems foolproof, right? Don't be dependent on people. Just trust the system, make sure it works, and I think that makes sure that you're set up, because people may be compromised, but when you got something in place for changes of any kind, right? The companies, even during COVID and the lockdowns, that were the quickest to understand and adapt were the ones that made it through more successfully than those who took time and were in denial. So as the world is changing, I think it's important to keep that mindset, and I think we'll be good.
Right? Shekha?
Perfect. I think we started the session with a prompt that said something like, what is the workplace of the future? And that's my key takeaway. I think the workplace of the future is not a workplace, it's a community. It's a community that needs to be based on several pillars, such as trust, respect, empowerment. Give these to your community and you'll thrive. You'll create like nothing has ever been created before, and I think that's the way forward.
Thank you. Well, that's very interesting perspectives from all of you. Thank you for that. I'll open it up to audience for any questions.
May I just add one thing?
Sorry, Mashal,
Okay.
you wanted to add something.
Yes, exactly what you said, but also have Gen Z running departments. Like, I think we need that, right? I think that's probably one final one as well.
Amen for that. I'm good. I'm good with the promotion.
Please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks to the panel for some very insightful observations. You mentioned we could all be buying beach lounges in Sri Lanka. That might be the answer to the question I'm talking about in here. But I wondered if you could give me some insights as panelists, as your views on what that workplace of the future looks like in not just the community side, but actually the physical location in terms of offices to keep it relevant within all the concepts and ideas that you've shared with us this afternoon.
Okay, shall I start? So I think for me, I actually do not believe that it should be confined to a physical space. I think a physical space is optional. It's great if you want the team to meet in person and have community engagements and so on and so forth, but I don't think it's a must. You need to give people the trust to work from wherever they feel comfortable, and productivity, I believe, will rise. My 2 cents on this.
So I see the glass doors disappearing and the brick walls disappearing and areas of collaboration being prevalent. I see mandated desks for set individuals gone and desks available for those to sit wherever they want, whenever they want, depending on the project they're working with. So some projects require more engagement, whereas other projects require silence in a corner and analysis. So this flexibility, this agility is what I feel the new age, and this is what we've done in our offices. So sitting behind a closed door in an office with the door kind of sealed almost negates this entire DNA that we're now shifting to.
I would say a mix, right? I think it's important for core team members and players to come together and have experiences that build relationships and bonds. But then in office spaces, having and accommodating for folks who may be more introverted and maybe overstimulated with a lot of people, and having that sort of optionality where they can work from wherever, but being very productivity driven in that way, right? So no more like you got to show up to the office, but projects and again, I guess systemizing things. And so having spaces where you can sit together and have that, but then also having isolated spaces where people can be doing whatever they want to be doing as long as they're getting stuff done. And I think that is probably the best sort of middle ground and scenario. And making sure that all comms and everything is online on systems and platforms, because that way, regardless of physical location, everyone has the same information and it's transparent and work is still getting done and nothing gets stopped.
And from a personal experience, what we have done is different departments have different needs. So for example, our coders, our engineers, they perform much better working from home because they're not distracted. They're able to code properly without any distractions. So they're not coming to our office. Sometimes we meet them once a week when we need to have that meeting, but they have agreed and we have agreed that it's better for them to work mostly from the home so they can get things done. So it matters as well between departments and what is needed as a job to be done.
That's flexibility in a different form. You need to be adaptable to individual needs in many ways.
Exactly.
We do have a central time zone, though, that we try to make people understand no matter where they are, that time zone, people need to be active. So that's a big one because we have people, a lot of them in different time zones and spread across. And so just knowing that expectation helps a lot.
Right. Other questions? Please.
So first of all, I wanted to address something to Sheikha, Roberta Calarese from Dubai. You said that it's important for you trust, respect, empowerment. Trust me, this is something that we've all been looking for, whether we are baby boomers, Generation Z. So. But I think the one element that is missing in the conversation is purpose. So if you were to ask me what I would give Generation Z or Generation Y is purpose. I would teach purpose in schools. I would teach purpose in the work environment. I would, through policy, ask organizations to define their own purpose, which ultimately is the collective purpose of the people within. So a voice is important, a purpose is important, and an understanding of the interconnectedness of the world and the fact that, if you make a decision today in Saudi Arabia, it may impact somebody in the United States. And so understanding this and helping people to do a journey within and look at the totality of the being, I think will be what will transform the generations and how they lead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thoughts on
Rebecca,
that,
I think
Shikha?
I think that's a beautiful point because a lot of Gen Zers, we come with our own purpose, right? We've discovered our own purpose. But a lot of entities that we end up in don't have a clear purpose. So you often feel misaligned and you don't feel it the first couple of months. You feel it after some time and you're like, what have I been doing here, right? So it's very imperative for these entities to have a purpose and to showcase that loud and clear to make sure that these thoughts are aligned with those talent that you're bringing in. Beautiful point.
Right.
I think also the importance of learning to create space in the energy field, because the way we've been used to leading is really from the past and, based on experience, based on logic, and actually doing all the time. And I think training people to be instead of do and allowing space so that you can actually learn from the emerging future will help a lot of Generation Z to lead in a better way.
100%.
Absolutely. I think we have time for one more question before we close.
You spoke about the government as a policy maker. Serving the country is a purpose. That's true. But how today the public sector as an employer is adapting to the new reality and is able to attract people like you?
Answer that's above my pay grade. No, I'm kidding. I think I was attracted to joining the public sector because I think the public sector has a lot of power to be able to mold what our country looks like, right? And in growing economies such as Saudi Arabia and Dubai, the government had the largest hand in kind of shifting that change, and then people took it forward, right? So I wanted to be a part of these change makers, like our panel said, right? I wanted to align myself with that first power move and then see things go from there. The way that they were able to attract me, I don't think they presented anything other than the opportunity, to summarize.
So I will add something, and a very dangerous statement given that we have a Gen Z on the panel, but I will say it regardless. So we sense in our experience that they're also very motivated by the check at the end of the month, the money. If you look, 20 years back, the typical path is you follow a certain career path, and then at the end of the line you have your pot of gold, and then you retire and you feel that you've won. Now that pot of gold has to be at the beginning of the line, and the reality is this new generation is driven by that check. That's why loyalty is not as high as it was before. So yes, the purpose in an organization is all fine and well. The reality is when it gets hard, and it does get hard, and you lose sight of that purpose, and you will lose sight of that purpose. At the end of the day, the only thing that counts for this generation is the cash that comes into their pocket at the end of the month. This is what we've seen, and this is why kind of, retention has been quite a challenge over the past few years, and this is just our personal experience. I know this is a controversial topic, but we can have this separately.
We're not 100%, and so the other part of that is also I'm seeing a lot of Gen Z who were unhappy with where they were working, decide to start their own companies, literally be competing with the companies they were working at some point. So a lot of them, because they got icks from their manager, and now we're like, yeah, this conversation 2 weeks ago, a friend of mine who was unhappy got the icks and decided to leave, and now has his own agency managing creators and yeah, they're just going to do that. So that's the other part of it. One way or the other, they'll figure out a way.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for your time. I think it was a very interesting conversation. It's a topic that does incite some passion. I think we were relatively civilized as a group talking about it. We should be proud of it. But obviously, there's a lot of good there. There are obviously challenges that we talked about. I think there is the sense of being driven by a purpose, the sense of wanting to be change makers, the sense of wanting to own something, the sense of being able to shift and move around, I think are all very important aspects. But at the same time, the sense of ensuring that there is a boundary, as you suggested, is important. And as companies, for companies to understand what the exact motivations are, whether they be money or whether they be other reasons, to be able to balance that out, segment who reacts to what is quite important. And we got to see a lot of the tips and tricks that I think you've used, and I think you've given a lot of ideas to people on how they can come up with new tips.
I give consultations occasionally.
For Gen Z. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.